Mac, you've been covering sports in the state of Texas, the Metroplex, for a long time. You've seen stories of triumph and heartbreak and victory and defeat and, I don't know, lots and lots and lots of other things. You got a really cool story to cover right now with this TCU football team that has continued to win, and they knock off Michigan last week, and now the TCU Horned Frogs are playing for a national championship in football. It's a little crazy.
Oh, my God. It's insane. I mean, Richard, A, thanks for having me on. It's always great to talk to you. And B, I worked at TCU as a graduate assistant in their, what they used to call sports information office.
Yeah.
So I worked there for 2 years from 96 to 98, and I got a graduate degree from there. And I can't describe to you how bad, one, the athletic department was, and two, how low the morale was then. So to see how all of this has how all of this has evolved from 1996. Remember, they were in the WAC then. They were in the 16-team WAC with Hawaii and Fresno State and New Mexico and Colorado State and SMU and Rice. I mean, there's just all these teams. And I was talking to someone today who really nailed it. It was rinky-dink, and we all knew it. I think that was the thing. We knew we were bad, and it was a we then. I worked for the school then. We knew we were bad. We knew we were a laughingstock. We knew we were a joke. We knew we stunk, and we knew it. And I was young then. I really worked hard, and I was trying to do, my job well because I wanted to move up. And I knew we were bad. I knew it. And so I come at this from that perspective. And for people who are, I can't believe it. I can't believe it that they've done this because as well as I do, college football is set up for the big power schools. And TCU has an undergraduate enrollment of about 10,500. That's a little bit smaller than Vanderbilt. It's a little bit bigger than Notre Dame. And they did it. I just, the more I talk about it, the more I think about it, the more I'm just amazed that they did it. And I know I'm biased because the team's right down the street. I've watched them for a long time. But I do think they can beat Georgia. I don't know if they will, but I think they can play with them. And if you can play with them, you can beat them. And don't be surprised if they win this game. They can do it.
Mac, when divorces happen, there is, even when good divorces happen, there's some level of bad blood and a bad taste that is left in your mouth. And there were two divorces that happened in a relatively short time with Chris Del Conte, the athletics director who was credited with doing so much for TCU athletics, taking the job at Texas, and then Gary Patterson being ushered out and then ultimately joining the staff at Texas. But I'm curious, even if there's some level of bad blood with those two people moving on to Austin, is there also some credit that goes to those two guys for laying the groundwork for making a season like this under Sonny Dykes possible?
I give them all the credit, for sure. I give Gary a lot of credit. I mean, you have to give him credit. You have to. You have to give Chris Del Conte credit. And, the one thing when Chris left, I think there was disappointment. There was disappointment because they wanted the TCU people, and I'm sure you've seen it at Ole Miss, when, what was that crook's name, Tuberville left. You want to be the school where you want to be a destination job. And when someone leaves for Texas or any other job, but let's just say in this case TCU for Texas, TCU fans, TCU alums, really the alums, wanted to think, no, we're just as good as they are, and they might be, but Texas is maybe the biggest brand in college sports. If not, it's one of the top five. I'm talking brand. That's not just football. That's everything. And so they understood why he left. I think there was just disappointment. But he deserves a lot of credit for this. Absolutely. He deserves a ton of credit because his ability to build relationships and fundraise is a big reason why TCU was in the position that it was in. to be asked to join the Big 12. And this doesn't happen if they're not asked to join the Big 12 after Texas A&M went to the SEC. And certainly with Gary, what Gary did in 20 years at TCU is historic. And I know it's bittersweet for him. I know it is. And I know it's tough. It would be for anybody. The place that you love, the place where you put your heart and soul into for 20 years, it's tough because they gave him an opportunity when nobody would have given him that opportunity. Nobody. And they did, and they allowed him to grow into the job. And because of that, it was a mutually beneficial relationship, Richard, and both parties thrived. And it was also time. It was apparent it was time. And, Richard is, I like the guy. He's a weird guy, but a lot of coaches are. I like him, and I do feel bad for him in the sense that this should be his moment too. And it is, but it's not. He's not the head coach anymore, and I know it's tough. For Del Conte, he's been gone now for several years, but he should just. Anybody who helped lay a brick from the fall of 1998 on gets credit for this. Anybody, athletic directors, associate ADs, coaches, assistant coaches, graduate assistants, players, they were all advancing the ball. And if someone had told you, Richard, it's crazy. TCU is in a national championship game in football, not baseball,
right,
not basketball, football, the biggest sport there is that powers college athletics. And TCU, a school of 10,500, that was nothing 20 years ago. Go 23 years ago. Is one game away from national championship, and at worst, will finish number 2 in the polls for the second time since 2011. That's incredible.
Mac, I think people in Mississippi can relate because of what you just said a second ago. Mississippi State 2 years ago, Ole Miss last year won a national championship in baseball, and it's unbelievable. And I can't imagine the way people would react if either of those two programs in the state in which we live got to this point where they were playing for a national title. We've only got 2 minutes left before the break. Let me ask you this. When did it change? When did people genuinely start to believe? I was looking back through the schedule. Okay, the win over Oklahoma, the win over Kansas, giving them the first loss of the season, the double overtime win over Oklahoma State, the mad scramble at the end of the Baylor game, finally getting respect from the playoff committee after going, well, we don't really like the way they're winning. When was it that TCU fans believed that something like this could actually happen?
I think it was an evolution. It really was an evolution because when they beat Oklahoma, we weren't sure how bad Oklahoma was.
Yeah.
That it was just an average team. I don't think anybody really knew then. But if you go back to that game, they pulled their starters. TCU pulled the starters in the third quarter. That's how bad that beating was. I think the one that and people would deny it, but I think the one where that convinced everybody that they could go to the playoff. The playoff was when they beat Texas, because it wasn't that they just beat Texas. It was the way they beat Texas. The final score was 17-10, but really it was 17-3. Texas didn't get 200 yards of offense that game, and TCU's defense has been kind of middling. But they've made plays when they needed to play, when they needed them. They shut down Bijan Robinson. Guy only had 28 yards on 12 carries, and really the Texas offense only scored 3 points. They got a defensive touchdown on a fumble return for a touchdown at the very, very end of the game that made it 17-10. But Richard, in my mind, that's the game when everybody knew, oh my God, we might go to the playoff. And that's what did it. They were a 7-point underdog, even though they're the 4th-ranked team in the country, and they went in and they manhandled UT on their home field. And so now, I'm after the way they beat Michigan. It's not that they beat Michigan. It was the way they beat Michigan. They ran the ball on them. And it's other than J.J. McCarthy, their running backs didn't do that much damage. That's why it gives me Georgia's trying to go undefeated. That's really, really hard. I think Georgia is probably going to win, but don't be surprised if TCU wins it.
It certainly is going to be a great scene, and it's coming up in just a few days. Monday night in Southern California. You going, Mac? You going to be there?
Yeah, you know what? I am. I went to the Fiesta Bowl. That was one of the most enjoyable games I've ever watched in person, and I'm excited to see it. It's history.
Awesome, man.
No matter what happens, you got a tiny little school playing a blue blood power like Georgia in the title game, And, for so many of my friends, this means so much to them. I'm happy for them. And I think it proves, whether we're Ole Miss fans, Mississippi State fans, anybody else, like, well, they can do it. We can do it. Hell yeah, you can.
Always enjoy the time, Mac.